In today's farm report, minimizing feed spoilage, or shrinkage as it's known in the industry, is important for any producer if they want to maximize how long their feed will last. Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares some tips on how to minimize shrinkage.
I'm going to talk about how to minimize the amount of shrink in our diets, because we don't often think about that as a big source of loss or a big source of profit. Most of the research that's been done will show that on varying farms, when you put it in a mix, your shrink is going to be from about 8 to 15%. So when you look at that, that's one's double over the other. On most of our farms, that'll buy you a new pickup every year over and over and over again. And so it's really important to be thinking about how to minimize the shrink on your diets. Some of the areas that shrink happens, part of it is, or a lot of it is in forage, because they tend to shrink a lot more than our concentrates do. And so make sure if you've got horizontal storage that gets packed very well, that gets covered. The new oxygen barrier plastics will reduce shrink another 2 to 3%. The other thing about the shrink in our forages, like our haylage and corn silage, the shrink is the most nutritious part of the forage. You'll usually lose carbohydrates, which is starches and sugars, and it'll leave behind the fiber. And so not only do we lose feed, we also lose the best quality feed, and so our cows are less likely to milk. From a concentrate storage standpoint, that can shrink a fair amount too, depending upon the wind when we're dumping it in. So wind, spoilage, bird consumption, driving over it, so rain and snow damage. Bulk bins can take care of a fair amount of that. I know they're a little bit more expensive and they bridge, and there's some challenges with those. But if you're going to use flat storage, make sure you keep it clean. Try to keep the birds out as best you can, and try to be careful when you're scooping up so you don't spill a lot of it. And also try to maybe load in an area where it's less windy, and you might have to move that around if you're loading outside. I mentioned yesterday about kind of TMR mixing protocols. And try to do as good of a job you can, or maybe make a premix to try and make it a little more accurate. But every time you add a bunch of an ingredient to a diet that maybe you don't need or isn't called for, it may not be shrink per se, cows might consume it, but that extra protein they may not need either. So in reality, it does drive up your feed cost. Don't forget that another area may be excess weightbacks. You want to throw away some of feed so the cows aren't out of feed. But excess weightbacks or cleanups that even go to heifers, it's a fairly expensive heifer feed. So really kind of continue to fine tune those weightbacks and try to not minimize them, but try and just really kind of optimize them to the lactating cows and really minimize them to the heifers. I think we really ought to be feeding all our heifers to a slick bunks. Research shows that's a good thing, and also improves feed efficiency. So try to think about over the next several months how we can minimize the amount of shrink on your farm. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension.
The Minnesota Pork Board, along with the National Pork Board, is soliciting research proposals for 2016. The categories that research priorities are for the swine industry include animal health, animal welfare, and manure management, among others. More information can be found by going to mnpork.com. The deadline to submit is November 17th.